Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
If you just flew in from Siberia or landed your spaceship on Earth any time over the last 2 or 3 weeks, you could be excused for believing that this problem between cops and communities of color, long thorny, but now as explosive as a powder keg, is the sole responsibility of Republicans, conservatives, and Donald Trump, not necessarily in that order. I mean, certainly the great cities that have been declared by leftist politicians and big media outlets and wizened academics as cesspools for systemic racism, the latest mantra for those serious about their virtue signaling, must be ruled by those white privileged Republicans, right? Oh, wait. Let's step back for just a moment and consider some facts that are utterly inconvenient to the cultural Marxists having a field day at the expense of decent, normal Americans. This default position about the race-tarnished right is not only untrue, it's the opposite of the truth. Who exactly is responsible for the behavior of the police? It's the mayors and councils elected to run our cities. And who is it that negotiates with police unions in contracts that cover everything from compensation to the adjudication of misconduct charges? Why, it's those same politicians. And what party has been running these cities forever? Well, what do you know? The Democrats. So when Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is hit with 17 misconduct complaints and none of them are adjudicated, exactly who is ultimately responsible for the 18th incident which stoked race riots across the land? Consider New York and Washington, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Boston, Baltimore, among others, all ruled by Democrats, all hit by post-George Floyd riots, all with major police problems, all with a wide assortment of important black Democratic officials. No GOP fingerprints anywhere. Put a finer point on it, just one of the nation's top 10 largest cities and 5 of the top 30 have Republican mayors, Republican rule. And as much of urban America was under siege, not one of those GOP-run cities were hit by major insurrections. Who is responsible for the type of persistent poverty, crime, joblessness, and misery that leads to the violence and racial balkanization we've been forced to witness? Maybe it has something to do with the people who've governed those cities for decades. But we need to go further back than that. Progressives have been animated by the 1619 Project, the brainchild of the Trump-addled New York Times, claiming that the true founding of this nation was 401 years ago, 1619, when slave ships arrived on our shores. They argue that it created a white supremacist footprint so deep and wide that it can never be remedied, only destroyed. So then let's go ahead and review what's actually happened over those 401 years. First, slavery, which was embedded in the culture before America's independence, but after the founding, it was a lifestyle for Democrats and opposed by Republicans. Remember Abe Lincoln? Then segregation, lynchings, the Ku Klux Klan, Jim Crow laws, all fostered in the former Confederacy, the virtually exclusive domain of, you guessed it, Democrats. But that's old news, say the Democrats. We're different since the days of the Civil Rights Movement. So how are Democrats to blame for the explosion of racial violence which followed the execution of George Floyd? For Exhibit A, let's connect a couple of dots that are obvious to normal people but buried by the left. Gross police misconduct and the end-to-end progressive leadership of Minneapolis. The larger of Minnesota's Twin Cities features a young, uber-progressive mayor in way over his head and a 100% Democratic city council. Now, one comment by Council President Lisa Bender tells you all you need to hear. After she and her colleagues endorsed the full defunding of their police department, she was asked how she would respond to the concerns of, say, a homeowner trying to fend off an attacker in a police-free environment. And Lisa Bender, City Council President of Minneapolis, said that question, quote, comes from a place of privilege. Really, she actually said that. As for Donald Trump, the perpetual target of unhinged leftist rage, perhaps a little math will bring perspective on the 4 centuries-long steaming cauldron of white supremacy depicted by those shark-toothed progressives. They blame Trump for the riots as they have for everything else. But if you pull out your calculators for just a moment, or don't bother to, because I'll do it for you, you'll notice that Trump has been president for exactly 7/1000ths of 1% of the time since the true founding of the country. 0.007%. So much damage in so little time, apparently. Just how much wreckage must be strewn across the landscape before we come clean about the unmitigated nightmare that has been the rule of the Democratic Party over urban America? The media will never connect the dots. And of course, neither will the ivory tower academic Marxists undergirding the political class as they poison the minds of our youth with deconstructionist lectures from the safety of their ivory towers. They're largely responsible for fomenting the present movement to tear down society as we know it. William F. Buckley once said famously that he would rather be governed by the first 1,000 people listed in the phone book, remember that, than by faculty members from an Ivy League university. Amen to that. The only promising option for reining in the cops without abandoning the rule of law is to actually strip authority from the spectacularly incompetent Democratic politicians who have for decades demonstrated an inability or unwillingness to rein in police misbehavior. Or, since these riot-torn cities generally refuse to elect Republicans except temporarily to clean up messes left by particularly incompetent Democrats, maybe it's time to even consider privatizing the police. After all, could the private sector, or even a bunch of randomly selected individuals with a lick of common sense, possibly do any worse than the Democratic Party?